Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Amicable Divorce Network podcast. We are in season 2, and if you've been with us or if you're just joining, we are going chapter by chapter through the Amicable Divorce Network's new book, Divorce Amicably, Your Roadmap to Resolution. This book is available on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and hardback. It is 500 pages, so it qualifies as a textbook, and we are going to go through each chapter and talk to our authors and get all of that information out to you guys through the podcast. Right now we are on chapter 21, and I am joined by Alexandra Geczi, and today we are talking about how to talk to your spouse about divorce. This is a very difficult topic that people really struggle with, and I'm sure Alexandra and I get asked this all the time, how to do it, how's the best way to do it. Alexandra is a Dallas family law attorney, and she's also the Amicable ambassador for the Dallas area. Thank you so much for joining me, Alexandra, and for your work here on the book and doing this important chapter.
Well, I think what you're doing is important, and more people should know about it, so I'm happy to join you and spread the message of amicable divorce.
Absolutely. And you're doing it down there in Texas, and so if anybody out there is listening and are interested in this in Texas or the Dallas area, you can reach out to Alexandra directly, and we'll have her information in the show notes. So you wrote a very important chapter, how to talk to your spouse about divorce.
Yeah.
I'm sure you get the same questions I do in consults, like what should I say? You know, how do you recommend that I tell this person? And I don't know the person. I'm sure you're in the same seat. So you went through some very good tips here. So let's get through that. You know, the first one was reflect on your decision.
Yeah. I think that kind of wisdom came from clients. It's not something that I necessarily would have thought of as an attorney because, my mind is like, let's just get this process going. But I do debrief calls at the end of my cases to just sort of debrief the clients. How did things go? It's a complimentary call, and I just really am trying to get feedback about the process. I know it's a really difficult process.
Yeah.
Do they need referrals and things like that? And so one of the questions I ask them is, if you could go back now and give advice to your past self, what would that be? And you get a variety of answers, but a lot of times it's around mindset and how afraid they were. So knowing through those dark times, knowing what your goal is so very important. And so I think I put it in there. I don't know if I put the quote from one of my clients, but she very poignantly said, I had to be sure that this is what I wanted, because he didn't want the divorce, and there was a chance of reconciliation. I would forgive him, and it was this sort of back and forth. And so I had to really steel my mind and say, this is really what I want. Mind myself of that every time there was a temptation to just stop the process because it got too difficult, or because I thought about maybe reconciling or something like that. And that was the number one piece of advice, I think, was making sure that this is the process that you want to go forward with.
And that flows into your next tip, which is to have a clear mindset. And I think know what it is that you want, what path it is that you're taking, and being steadfast in that. It is difficult. It's a journey.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that also segues into like the preparation that they have to do, right? And so I think a lot of people superficially, you'll kind of think, oh, have we tried everything? How do we prepare? Counseling is great. And I definitely encourage, if that's right for you, but it's not right for everybody. I think as they're sort of reflecting back on, is this what I really want? I think they also need to sort of evaluate, is part of the problems in this, like maybe some mental health issues that myself or my spouse is having. And you could even go deeper and say physical. There's a lot of information out there now talking about women in their 40s and 50s going through some changes, things that doctors have been ignoring for a long time, that is coming to light, like, this is not normal. Let's treat you with, whatever medications, vitamin deficiencies, right? Things like that, where maybe it's just physical stuff that's been kind of dragging on the relationship. So sort of reflecting, is this something I really want, or is this just sort of like a symptom of something that's going on that's deeper, that maybe if I addressed that, we could have a better relationship.
Yeah.
And if you have explored that and you've decided, no, this is definitely the path for me, then I think it helps with that mindset and making sure that you're clear, because you have explored all these different options and you have that clarity now.
Yeah, for sure. So that's both the emotional and the physical preparation part.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that's unique about amicable divorce is often people very thoughtfully have chosen amicable divorce. Usually they maybe have been to counseling, maybe for a long time, or they've just been sitting with this decision and they've really researched their options and they've come to find us. Whereas I find where people take the more contested route, it's because if it's a knee-jerk reaction. Something made them angry on a Friday, on a Monday, they're in a divorce attorney's office wanting to battle it out. And so what would you advise people who are in that sort of angry space?
Select your attorney carefully, because I think a wise attorney is going to see that knee-jerk reaction and know this may not be what they really want. This may not actually be a good fit for their situation, and explain to them in a more rational tone, like, here are your real options. Like, yes, we can go down this traditional route of divorce, but did you know there's some other options, and why don't you sleep on it and give yourself a second to figure out what you really want, and is this destructive path really what you want, or is maybe after some reflection you kind of figure out some of these other alternatives are a better option.
Yeah, it's a big decision, so people should definitely be sitting with it. And if you're making an emotional decision, often, regardless, if it's buying a car or getting a divorce, that's usually not the best decision making. So I think that that's really good. You recommend that people actually look at their spouse's condition. So explain what you mean by that.
I think for a couple of reasons, right? Like, maybe your spouse is going through a hard time and you just have to have some grace and patience with them. Maybe it's just a temporary kind of rough patch, right? Divorce may not be, and I think of this because, like, kids are a big one, right? I've had young couples who just had kids come into my office. Like, one of the parties will come into the office and they're like, we're not on the same page. And I want a divorce. It's like, I had kids too. Like, I get it. Like that, especially the first kid, and it doesn't get any easier with multiple, the kids after. Like, it's an adjustment period, right? And you find that maybe you've had conversations with your spouse, like, oh, we're going to be on the same page with parenting, and then all of a sudden reality hits and you have these kids. And you're like, oh God, this is a nightmare. They're not getting up for the 2 a.m. feedings. They're not changing the diapers like they said they would. We're griping at each other, right? Okay, just maybe there's alternatives. Like, divorce is not really what you want. Maybe it's your spouse is really tired, or maybe, they're freaking out over being a parent. Like, the reality is hitting them, right? So maybe, again, consider that this is just a temporary patch. And so your spouse's condition may be a part of that, right? Mm-hmm. And especially, if earlier talking about sort of the health and stuff, maybe they are going through some health conditions or something that is temporary, right?
Yeah.
And then the other part of that too is when you think about your spouse's condition, thinking about, okay, if you've made the decision to divorce, thinking about sort of an empathy for your spouse, because you're going to be telling them that you want this divorce. Yeah. So kind of seeing where they're at in a situation is also going to be helpful in having that conversation moving forward.
Yeah, you have certainly dealt with some difficult situations as you have over the years, and I think you always want to check in about that person's mental health. How are they going to react to this? We definitely don't want any sort of, domestic violence or, suicide, which often a divorce can be a very triggering event, that can be very upsetting for somebody. So you always want to also be aware of where they're at, and make sure that they are protected. And that sort of flows into one of your other tips, which is choosing the right time and place. Sometimes timing is everything, as well as location. You don't want to be in, Applebee's on a Friday night, probably. So yeah. What is your recommendation in this regard?
You want probably a place, there's a few things that kind of come to mind for that. You want a place where you're going to have a focused conversation, something that's not going to be interrupted. Maybe it's a public place, maybe it's a private place. You want to also take into consideration escape, right? Either escape for you or escape for your spouse, in case things escalate, in case things get uncomfortable. And I'm not talking about escape like going to a shelter or something, but yeah, you know what? This conversation is not going the direction you wanted. One of us needs to just leave. And it could just be going to the next room or something like that if you're in your house, or if you're at a restaurant or at a park or something like that, right? Just a place where you're not like trapped and enclosed in this really uncomfortable situation and forced to exist there when maybe that's not the right thing to do. Or it could be safety concerns too.
Yeah.
You don't want the kids around, right? So, right as you're picking up kids from school and they're home, like, that's probably not the best time to talk about it either. If there's just different personal things going on, family situations, you just want to make sure that you're timing it appropriately to where you'll have a focused, calm, uninterrupted conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It's important, and I think if people are proceeding carefully, you have the time to pick the right time to pick the right place, and you never want minor children around. It could be an emotional conversation and want them totally out of the picture. Use clear, compassionate communication. What are your tips there?
I have to kind of look back at what I wrote here. I know, so, starting the conversation can be challenging. So I think I put in here, an example, how you can start the conversation is, I've been reflecting a lot on our relationship, and I feel that we need to have a serious conversation about our future. And so that can be a good opening line to begin the conversation. And after that, you want to make sure that you stay calm and focused during the conversation. You have been thinking about this for a while, but your spouse, this may be a total surprise to them. They are entitled to feel the way they feel. You've gone through some of your emotions and processed those things and processed your thoughts. This may be a brand new experience for them. So you need to you need to be a little bit patient with them and let them experience it. Don't shut down their feelings because they are valid too. And so you can acknowledge their emotions without becoming defensive. I would recommend you say I statements when you're talking about yourself and your perception of things and your perspective. I feel like we've grown apart, rather than, accusing them of like, well, you've pushed me away. Right? So don't put them in a defensive sort of position. And so that kind of goes into avoiding blame. It's easy to go down like all the reasons of why this divorce and it's your fault, right? Try to avoid those kind of statements and going down that path. If it comes up, just, I appreciate that. Step back from, let's focus on what we're here to discuss, right? And kind of come back to the original sentiment of let's have a productive conversation.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about people being at two different emotional places. And we see that almost 100% of the time. Usually the person coming into the divorce consult has been thinking about it for a while. Sometimes they're in a more peaceful and resigned place, and sometimes the other person is not there yet. And so one of our episodes is about the emotional stages of divorce. And so if you're listening to this episode and you haven't listened to that one, would be a great one to touch base on, to sort of understand where your spouse is at compared to you, because you may be very calm and resigned to this, and they may have some very big emotions that they're correct and justified to have if they are surprised by the divorce, but it's good to prepare yourself ahead of time.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I think is not acceptable is making threats. So when you're dealing with the emotional part of it, right? And so if someone begins to make threats, which I hear often is, one of the spouses, the spouse will make threats to take the children away or to leave them homeless or something like that, So that's not a healthy thing, and that's not a conversation you need to be a part of. But again, I would recommend you get educated in those situations. If you think that your spouse is not going to react well and they are going to have threats, I think you should empower yourself and educate yourself about your rights so you can stay calm during that conversation.
Yeah.
Because when you're in a place of fear and they're in a place of fear, it's going to escalate. But if you can stay calm, allow them to sit with their fear, and you can calmly sort of keep it productive, then I think that comes through empowering yourself to knowing what your rights are and stuff.
And people do that all the time. They say things that just aren't legally or factually true simply because they want to hurt the other person. They've just been hurt because this person wants a divorce, so they're going to try to say the most hurtful thing back. You are never going to see your kids again. I'm going to, leave you with no money, different things like that. And so we get calls like that all the time. Is this true? Is this something that's going to happen, etc.? So I think that's a great tip. Your next step is to be honest, but avoid overloading with details.
Yes, we've all had that moment. You walk into like a Michael's or a Hobby Lobby and you're like, ooh, all the shiny things, and like you go into overload, right? And you don't know.
I'm gonna be a florist now.
It's like, I came in here for like paint, and now you're walking away with a cart full of all this other stuff. So it's kind of the same thing, right? Like, don't overload them with information. Their reptilian brain or whatever is going to come out, and so it's going to be emotional. Even the most intelligent person is going to have some sort of emotional response to this. And so you need to make sure that you're not overloading them with too much information and too many details.
And so I think if you're watching us on video, this is the book that we give the first client to give the second client, and this has all the information in it. So what we recommend would be either this conversation or a different way that your attorney recommends is to leave this with them so that they can get informed about amicable divorce and get the information without you having to convey it to them. I've gotten some cases where the client brings me this and it's been all crumpled up because they got upset in that moment, but then they dug it out of the trash and, found me and gave me a call. So this is sort of a concise way to give a lot of information without sort of lecturing or having to talk too much, or getting in too much of an involved conversation.
And if they have questions, just, there's going to be a lot of different questions. We're going to talk about this later, but you can give them, it's an ongoing conversation, I think. So don't feel like you have to answer every one of the questions right in this moment.
And you may not know the answer. You can say, gosh, I'm not sure. I think we should talk to our lawyers about that, or a child therapist, or whatever the situation may be. I think if you're the person delivering the message, also don't feel like you need to have all the information in that moment. It really is just the beginning of a divorce journey. Focus on the future.
Yep. I think that is productive if you can have a calm and rational, like, okay, if this is going to happen, this is not the end. This is just it's a new beginning. It's a next chapter. And I think if you focus your mindset on that, it's helpful. If both spouses can get on board with that mindset, then it's actually can be very productive conversation. You guys can start talking about, financially, how are we going to pay the bills in the interim? If you have kids, like, how is the after school activities going to work? Like, where are you looking to live? Maybe should we live together, closer together? Opportunities where you're going to be farther away, like maybe start experimenting with some different visitation schedules, right? Start looking at your income potentials. If there's a disparity, are there ways that you can support each other right now so that this can be a shorter, quicker process? Like that's, I think, is actually a great example. I get a lot of stay-at-home moms in my practice, and we have career coaches, and they have, quick programs, 6-week program. And if the husbands could just support the wives and just say, hey, let's get this, it's $3,000, like let's get you into this program, and in 2 months you could be on your feet and have a job. Like that would make the process go so much faster. Instead, we argue for 2-3 months about alimony or about whether to pay for this program. And it's like, she could have done it.
It would have been done twice over by now.
Done already, and we're not dealing with alimony anymore. Like we can get straight to it, right?
Yeah. Well, let's hit that very, very quick.
Yeah.
Because you're in Texas, and I think it's important for people to know the changes we are seeing in some states, some of our more conservative states like Texas and Florida. And so when you say we're not dealing with alimony anymore, what are you talking about in regards to Texas?
So we have spousal maintenance. I call it alimony. That's how most people call it, but it's spousal maintenance. We also have contractual alimony. And so spousal maintenance is in our family code. I think a lot of people come in thinking that they're just entitled to it, and it's not that simple. You do have to meet certain requirements for it. Just because you've been married a certain amount of time does not mean that you're automatically going to get spousal maintenance. And so I think that's a conversation you need to have with your attorney about your situation and whether you would actually qualify for it. In most situations, I usually encourage the clients to get on their feet, get a job, and we can get some temporary alimony and then kind of look towards being, going back to work. Now, it's not feasible for every client, and that's when, we would have to sort of look and see, how does your judge feel about this? Is this going to be a contested issue? Is this something that we can agree on and work something out? Does that answer your question?
Well, would you say Texas is moving away from alimony and spousal support legally? It's not as prevalent as it once was? Is that correct?
In my practice, it hasn't been very prevalent. Most judges do not like awarding spousal maintenance.
Even with a stay-at-home mom?
Even with a stay-at-home mom. Yeah.
I think that's a hard reality for some people to accept. And I think it also makes it harder for them to take the step towards divorce because the financial unknown is quite difficult. So you were talking about the career coaches. I think that's amazing. And a 6-week program there, that's really great because that sort of fills hopefully the gap of fear and unknown and provides, some skills. But a lot of people don't realize that. I think you're correct. They think, oh, I've, been a stay-at-home mom and haven't worked in 15 years. I will be supported. Be the case.
And you may not always want it either. I mean, spousal maintenance, it creates this continued codependency, right, on your spouse. And especially if you've been in a controlling situation, it allows them to continue to control you. So I personally I'm not a huge advocate for it. I think there are situations where it is needed needed and it's a good idea, but I would say 80% of the time I'm trying to encourage my clients to not be dependent on that. Let's focus on getting you on your feet, getting you independent, financially independent, and then looking at the assets and figuring out how we can divide it in a way that supports you, that doesn't allow that continued control.
Yeah, that monthly payment can be stressful. Is it coming in? Is it coming in on time? Is there going to be a nasty comment on the check or the Venmo or, whatever it is? So I hear you there and what you're talking about. So going on to your next tip, reflecting back on these steps and discussing divorce with your spouse. Step 5 is discuss next steps. We've covered that a little bit with let's be future focused.
Yeah.
And then setting boundaries and expectations. This is probably the biggest change, even though it sounds like a small little statement, but this is where people, I think, go from being couples to being individuals. And that's a very difficult dynamic to maneuver.
It is. You might want to pull in like a co-parenting expert or a counselor or something like that to help you figure out what those boundaries are. There may be some things that you guys are doing. Well, for sure, there's things that you're doing that are toxic right now, which is why you're going through a divorce, right? And so you may have been years without these boundaries, and now you're having to sort of relearn how to create those boundaries. So getting an expert to come in and help you figure out what those boundaries are, what those coping skills are going to be, I think is a really good idea, especially when it comes to kids, because oftentimes the two main reasons I see for divorce are they're not on the same page financially, and they're not on the same page with kids.
Yeah.
And so to expect people, a lay person who's going through a divorce to just know how to handle those things and create those boundaries, I think is just not a reasonable expectation, but our society expects it.
Well, our court system expects
Yeah,
it, especially.
exactly.
Yeah, they expect you to be the perfect co-parent, and you've never co-parented before.
Yes. So I strongly encourage people to get help, professional help with that. And your attorney may not be the right person for that, because your attorney is your advocate, but they're focused on the law and negotiating things. They may not have the skill set necessary to help you work through that. And they may be more expensive too than getting someone who can help with that, like a specialist. But once you have those boundaries in place, it takes away a lot of the fear that I think keeps people stuck. And so it gives them stability, sets expectations, right? And things just become easier.
It provides confidence as well, I think, where people are like, oh, I could do this by myself. I can handle that. It wasn't as bad as I thought. And then they feel confident in their decision and in moving forward, because they're standing on their own 2 feet. And that's what was probably the scariest part of, just taking the first step to begin with. Step 6, give space and time to process.
Yes, we kind of hit on that before, but that initial conversation, it's just an initial conversation. You can't expect it to be done and negotiated all in that 1 minute, conversation where you brought it up. Like, you have to give some space for each of you to process what has been exchanged and then revisit it. And just kind of gauge when you are emotionally ready to talk about it. And it may be that you and your spouse are just never going to be emotionally ready. That's when it's important to have a team on your side that can help communicate between the two of you, your attorneys, counselors, parenting experts, financial person, real estate person, right? Like, that team can help with the communication on all those different issues if giving space and stepping back is just not working.
Yeah, for sure. So you also had about, pacing the conversation and some things like this. I mean, these are some very great actionable tips, I think, to be able to hand any client this book. And when they ask that question, say, Alexandra had a really great chapter on this where you could, really break that down there. I think that this will be incredibly helpful to people. So thank you very much for your work here. If people are listening to this and they want to work with you, they want to reach out, how can they find you?
Easiest way is going to be on our website, www.familylawdfw.com, and that's DFW as in Dallas Fort Worth.
And if you are listening to this and you have no way to write that down because you're driving a car, please know that you can check the show notes and we will have Alexandra's information there. You can also find her on amicableddivorcenetwork.com under the membership directory, as well as at divorceamicably.com under the membership directory. And if you're listening, be sure to get your copy of Divorce Amicably, Your Roadmap to Resolution on Amazon and get all of these helpful tips in your hand. Alexandra, thank you so much for joining me today and for all you do to help your clients.
And thank you, Tracy.